This is Jean Marie Ward for Buzzy Magazine. With me today is award-winning author John C. Wright, creator of 3 critically acclaimed series, The Golden Age, The Wardens of the Dreaming, and The Chronicles of Chaos. Welcome, John.
Welcome.
All your novels, science fiction as well as fantasy, luxuriate in dense, multi-layered allusions to world mythology, especially classical mythology. What inspired you to marry mythology to science fiction?
2 things. One is that my background, my educational background, I'm very familiar with and filled with great admiration for the classical poets, Hesiod, Homer, and Virgil. And I always thought that they had a tremendous both poetical and philosophical impact. The second was that science fiction strikes me as being the mythology of a modern age. So what is more natural than to marry mythology to mythology? Science fiction has many of the same tropies and interests that a classical myth has, but it takes place in a technological milieu. It takes place in a technological background. So the idea of having the far future, which was my first book, The Golden Age, was about the far future, have some of the same flavor and atmosphere as the far past would give the readers an easy way to get a sense of the immensity of some time. And if there were classical allusions in it, it would also give them a sense of the sort of the dignity of the ancients projected into the future. It could be familiar with at the same time as being unfamiliar, which is kind of what science fiction is all about, marrying the familiar with the unfamiliar.
Did you also, in the Golden Age, make some nods to your own literary heroes?
Yes, indeed. More than nods. I would say that I stole a bunch of stuff and stuffed it into my book. All the writers that I admired or that I disagreed with, I wanted to stick into my book. And a lot of literature is writers of one generation answering back to what the writers of the previous generation had said. And I do a little bit of that in the Golden Age. There's a nod to H.G. Wells, for example. There is a nod to my disagreement with the Isaac Asimov concept that you could design a robot with 3 laws of robotics. I don't think it's possible. If it's an intelligent creature, I don't see how you can program its morality into it, especially not into simple laws, and so on. So.
Yes. You mentioned your education. You had a rather unusual course of study in college, and did that influence, harking back to the mythology that one finds in your science fiction as well as your fantasy?
Let me describe my background. You call it unusual, and yet it's unusual only in the modern day. In the old days, my education would have been the classical education. It was just a classical liberal education. What liberal arts used to be, and in some places still is a study of the great books of Western literature, starting with the Greeks, the Romans, the Middle Ages, and so on, reading what the Plato, Aristotle, the famous poets, Euripides and Sophocles and so on, did in Athens, and just following through this conversation between the great books that I mentioned earlier, where each generation answers the questions the previous generation had. So at St. John's College, is a small college in Maryland where there's no tests and no grades, and all students follow the same course of study, and we read the great books of Western literature in chronological order. And so every class is a debate class, and so it is unique in the modern American educational scene. Yes, I would say that had a tremendous effect on my interests, and my interests, of course, influenced what I want to write about and what I write about. I don't think I would have read Homer if I had not had to read it in college. I don't think I would have read Tolstoy if I hadn't had to read it in college. And yet those 2 books are some of the most interesting books, some of the most fascinating things I've ever read. And I'm really glad that I did not go to a college where I got to choose my own course of study. Because I was a college student. I was a kid. I didn't know what was good. I didn't know what I should have read.
Did you read Homer in the original?
Yes and no. Yes, I can read, with the help of a lexicon and a lot of cups of coffee, I can force my way through the ancient Greek. But honestly, just between you and me and the audience, I was the worst Greek student in my entire class.
That sometimes happens.
However, if you want, that's the opening to the Iliad.
Yes, I didn't think it was the Odyssey.
No. Odyssey of Arms and the Man, I sing.
No, that's Virgil.
Oh, you're right. Well, so much for my education.
Do you ever worry that the complexities of your work will distance you from readers?
No, I don't worry about things like that. I write the way I read, by which I mean when I would read books, it would never occur to me to worry about whether or not other people also appreciated this book. I would read a book that was, to me, the book of gold. To me, that was the most precious work ever. So if my books go out there and don't get much critical acclaim or get too much critical acclaim, that doesn't bother me. Some of my favorite books, I never wrote a fan letter to the author. So I'm expecting that one or two of my books is going to find someone on that rainy day when they have nothing else to read. They're going to read it, and it's going to be the best thing ever for them. I'm never going to know who it is, but I'm writing for that guy, whoever it is, on that rainy day whenever it happens. So I don't worry about things like that. One reason why I write the way I do is because when I was a reader, that's the way I read. My favorite author of all time is A.E. Van Vogt, and I never wrote him a fan letter, so he never found out how important he was to me. But his book, The World of Nallet, created in me the interest I have to this day in philosophy. And if I hadn't been interested in philosophy, I wouldn't have gone to St. John's College in Annapolis. I wouldn't have had a law degree. I wouldn't have gone into newspaper work. Basically, nothing that I did in my life would have happened the same way had it not been for that book, which I read when I was like 13 or 14. Now, Mr. Van Vogt passed away recently of Alzheimer's disease, a memory disease, horrible, degenerative brain disease, which is ironic because of the glorious future he saw for mankind, and because of the immense potential that he saw in the human nervous system. In any case, I met the widow, and she was like the nicest person I've ever met in my life, and they gave me permission to write a sequel to my favorite book, World of Nallet. It's called Nallet Continuum is the name of the sequel, and I tried, insofar as it lay within me, to write a Van Vogt-style book, not a John Wright-style book. So none of my personal thoughts or philosophies are in the book. It's all stuff that I gleaned from reading, other Van Vogt books. And there's nods in the Nallet series to some of his other series, because I wrote that book for other Van Vogt fans like myself. But Mr. Van Vogt throughout his whole life never knew that I was such a big fan, and so that's probably going to happen to me. But if there's someone out there who is influenced as I was, who is as influenced as I was by that book, then I will have done my work as a writer.
Great. You broke into publishing not with your novels, great as they are, but through short stories. And you continue to write in that form. Do you approach writing a short story differently than you approach writing a novel?
No. I usually write a short story as if it is one chapter, one episode, in an otherwise larger background story, usually which I have something in mind. So, no, I don't really have a defensive approach for that.
So it's not too hard to switch back and forth for you?
It is hard for me to switch back and forth because I find short stories difficult to write. I find it difficult to write anything short. I'm too wordy. I tend to write trilogies. My natural length is panoramic and gigantic. It's really difficult for me to write a simple story about a simple event that I can compress into a short space of time. Though I did actually once write a 1,000-word story for a flash fiction, a microfiction, that I managed to cram 4 different science fictional ideas into that one brief story. It was called A Random World, was the name of that short story. It's available on the web, free.
Oh, hey, that's great. Is there a link to it from your website?
Yes.
Okay. You are also, in addition to writing novels, writing short stories, an active gamer.
Yes.
And how did gaming influence or figure into your writing?
Gaming influences my writing at every stage of the game. My first book, The Golden Age, was originally an idea I had for a game, and I thought it would be a better novel than a game, so I didn't work it out as a game. I made it a novel instead. My second book was based on a game that I played in that my wife ran as a moderator. My third book was also based in a game that I played in. You see, the problem is, I shouldn't say the problem. The advantage of gaming is that you have a bunch of other people, you and your friends, get to think through every implication of the false to facts assumption you're making as the conceit or the basis of the story. So if you're writing a fairy tale where you have people able to turn invisible, you may or may not think of how society will react or how people would take defensive measures against invisible people walking up to them. But if you're in a gaming situation, the moderator will have to think through what the limitations are on the powers, what the likely ramifications are, because some player will try it. Some player will try to do it. So most of what I write is either influenced by or inspired by or has been play tested through a game at one point or another.
Cool. Is what you're working on now in any way influenced by a recent game?
No.
Ah!
It's the first book I've done which I tried to turn into a game to amuse my friends, but I wasn't able to come up with a good way of doing it.
Is Count to a Trillion part of a trilogy?
No, it's part of a quadrilogy, maybe a quintuplilogy, depending on whether or not I can force my word count low enough to get within 5 books. So I'm writing between, the Count to a Trillion takes place between 2 centuries from now and the heat death of the universe. So I have a lot of time to cover.
A lot of area to cover, yeah.
A lot of area to cover. And it's a love story. It's about a man whose wife goes away on a star voyage and he has to wait for her to come back. And he's the guy who's invented the cryogenic suspension process that made both her voyage and his waiting possible. But he has to make sure that the Earth is capable of receiving and decelerating a light sail ship. He has to make sure there's a working braking laser, because the aliens to whom she is going to plead for the salvation of the human race will not regard mankind as a spacefaring culture unless we actually do it, unless we actually show that we have institutions and love that can last that long over interstellar distances and the abyss of time necessary for interstellar time.
Ah, that is a challenge. Are you working on the second book in the series?
No. The second book of the series is already in the editor's lap. I'm working on the galleys of the second book. I'm writing the fourth book. And I'm also trying to correct any spelling errors, and there were a lot of spelling and grammatical errors in this book that the editor didn't catch.
Oh no!
That I'm trying to get corrected in the paperback version. I think there's one math error too. So.
Oh no! Well, in science fiction, there can't be anything worse than a math error.
No, there's nothing worse than a math error.
Oh dear! Is there anything else that you're working on that you'd like to talk about to our audience?
Yes, there's a book called Somewhither that exists only in manuscript right now that is on my editor's desk that I'm trying to talk him into buying. It's an alternate history story where the parallel timelines deviate according to different worldviews. So the idea is that each universe is created by the human species of that variation of history having a different theory of what the universe is, and that creates a new universe. That's the idea there. And there's ninjas and vampires and absurdities and 40-foot tall walking suits of armor and the Tower of Babel and a bunch of other mythological stuff. I took for my alternate human beings, I took the myths from the Traveler's Tales from the Middle Ages. So I have Blemmies who have no heads, and Skyapods who have only one leg, and Panotes who have gigantic ears like sails, and all the other things that people thought existed beyond the Riffian Mountains or beyond Taprobane back when they didn't know what was on the other side of the planet. So that's what I took for my inspiration for that story.
Very cool. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Nope.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, John.
My pleasure.
And thank you from Buzzy Magazine.